Thanks so much, Eric. Welcome to all the media on the call today. I'm Alicia, Deputy Communications Director. Please mute your computers just to help mitigate any echoes. And if you have questions, you can use the raise hand kind of chat feature, or you can type them into the chat over there. We'll have time at the end for Q&A. And with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Grove.
Thanks, Alicia. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. I'm actually coming to you from Fargo right now. We're up here for the Midwest Economic Growth Summit with the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber. A lot of Chamber of Commerce is up here and other economic development officials, and a lot of exuberance for the Midwestern economy right now and this inflection point we all feel that we're at and what we need to do to grow it. So in that spirit, a good day to be releasing these jobs numbers. As you probably have seen from the press release, we had a good month in February. Minnesota's unemployment rate dropped to 2.7%, a historically low number. I mean, there's not been this low since 1999. And, a lot of times during the pandemic, we talked about the unemployment rate going down is always not necessarily a good sign because people were leaving the labor force. But the good news is these recent dips in the rate have been because people are coming into the labor force and taking new jobs. Their labor force grew by about 13,366 people over the month, and that number we've all been watching, the labor force participation rate, popped about 0.2 of a point, actually 0.3 of a point, up to 67.9%. Still one of the best in the nation, certainly lower than before the pandemic, but some good progress there that we're excited about. So some good news on the horizon this month. I think the continued progress of our economy, particularly during a month where we were still experiencing some of that Omicron surge, is a good sign, as businesses are figuring out how to navigate this new global climate. And still a lot of uncertainties out there, but I think a moment for us to be happy about the progress we made over the last month. Nationally, you saw we're still running about a point better than the country, and our labor force participation rate remains about 5 percentage points stronger than the rest of the country. So that strong work ethic that Minnesotans have traditionally shown remains one of our advantages competitively as we look across the country. So that job gain of 5,200 was about a 0.2% bump in job growth this month. As you might have noticed from the numbers, we did have to seasonally adjust, or I should say the federal government seasonally adjusted and made some revisions to our numbers from last month, showing we didn't have quite as big of a gain as had been reported then. We had, I think, around 10,000 jobs we reported last month. Turns out that was only around 4,800 jobs in January. And for those interested in the data and how it works, we can have Angelina explain that a little bit later. But still job growth last month, just not as fast as we had expected. The U.S. Job growth was about 678,000 jobs, as you may have seen several days ago, about 0.5% growth. So we are lagging slightly the job growth that is being experienced nationally. And I think when you try to unpack why that is, there's a couple of interesting numbers just to track here that I think are helpful to share. In Minnesota right now, we have about 2.8 job openings for every available worker in the state. And that number nationally is about 1.7 job openings per available worker nationwide. So we do have a tighter labor market here than the rest of the country, even though the rest of the country is experiencing historically tight labor markets across the United States. So we're, as a state, at a rate of about the fifth highest in job openings at 8.1% compared to about 7% nationally. And at the same time, you have we have the eighth lowest unemployment rate nationally. So that's really a formula for a tight labor market that we know we need to address, that I think our employees are telling me about every day. And that's really critical to our growth, is to not hold it back by that lack of available workers. And we can talk more about that in the coming conversation. So, a good month for us, but we do remain very focused on the fact that we have a tighter labor market here in Minnesota than most states. And it's really a top priority for us as we help Minnesota businesses and workers connect. In terms of the sectors that gained, we saw manufacturing go up by about 900 jobs. Trade, transportation, and utilities went up by about 3,100 jobs last month, driven by retail trade in particular, so a great month for retail. Losses were in construction and financial activities. Leisure and hospitality and industry, we've all been following more the last few years in terms of job growth, was pretty flat over the last month. No major shifts in the job growth or loss there. But big picture, and we always want to kind of bring it back to this number, we lost 417,600 jobs when the pandemic began in those first months. We've now gained back about 71% of those jobs, with about 296,600 back since that initial drop at the start of the pandemic. One of the issues we know so many consumers and businesses are focused on is, of course, inflation. And the inflationary pressures have only accelerated since the war in Ukraine has unfolded over the last month. We know Minnesotans are thinking about this a lot. And the numbers there this month continue to show a story that inflation is outpacing wage growth. We saw over the year average hourly earnings rise by about 7.1% over the last year, which is a good thing, about 10% over the last 2 years. But you see that inflation index at about 7.9% over the last year and about 9.7% over the last 2 years. So we can get into the details if it's interesting to folks, but we do see inflation continuing to outpace wage growth largely, and that's something that we know is challenging for a lot of consumers. Wage growth in certain industries, the lowest wage industries and the most high demand industries, has increased faster than inflation, which is a good thing. You see these higher demand jobs like nursing and residential care facilities outpacing wage growth in other industries. So about a 14.1% bump in nursing and residential care facility wages, which again, I think just points to the fact that those jobs are harder to hire for. And frankly, have traditionally had pretty suppressed wages. So that bump is good. Retail trade is also up about 14.5% over the last 2 years. So that's an industry that has really had to shift wages to entice workers. And you see the same thing in hospitality, where you've had about a 10% increase in wages over the last 2 years in our hospitality industry. So that's not making the dent that we would like to see. These industries still really need workers, but it is part of the story here as employers look to hire more workers in a tight market. So, this is the 5th straight month of job growth in Minnesota. We're thankful for that. We're grateful to the hard work of our businesses and our workers to make that possible. We've got a journey ahead of us, of course, as we continue to grow our economy in the wake of this pandemic, but some continued good signs early this year, with a lot of unknowns on the horizon, but certainly a moment where Minnesota businesses are stepping up. And, I'll just say, speaking to a lot of businesses every week in this role, I'm hearing a lot of optimism and exuberance for where our economy is headed, and a desire really to make sure that Minnesota's a forward-leaning state and that we're writing the next chapter of the global economy right here in our state. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to our labor market information research director, Angelina Nguyen, who's going to go through some more details, and then we'd love to take your questions. Angelina, over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go over some visuals that dive into the details of what the Commissioner have mentioned already. So this first graph follows unemployment rate and job growth since before the pandemic. And as you can see, we are on a positive, consistent trend. So unemployment rate is the bars, and it's been going down consistently since May 2020. And February, we are at 2.7%, which is the lowest that it has ever been since 1999, as the Commissioner had mentioned. And then the two lines are job growth, and blue line is all jobs. Green line is private sector jobs, and they're both growing for the 5th month in a row. All jobs, we gained 5,200 jobs, and private sector gained 5,100 jobs in February. Next slide, please. So the economy is recovering, but it hasn't been equal for everyone. When we look at the adjusted unemployment rate, which is adding the unemployment rate plus the change in labor force participation rate since right before the pandemic, we see that Black workers and Hispanic workers have not been doing as well as white workers. So the green bars here are the unemployment rate, and ideally you want it to be as short as possible. Shorter is better. And the blue bars is the change in labor force participation rate since right before the pandemic. So again, you want the blue bar to be short, meaning that there hasn't been much of a change, meaning that the pandemic hasn't negatively impacted labor force participation rates. So as you can see, it took longer for Black workers to recover than for Black workers and Hispanic workers to recover than for white workers. So in February, Black workers' unemployment rate is 6.5%, which is more than twice as high as the white unemployment rate of 3.2%. The Hispanic unemployment rate is 4.7, which is almost 1.5 times higher than the white unemployment rate. In terms of labor force participation, rate recovery, all groups are doing okay. So the Black workers change between now and right before the pandemic is 1.6%. So that means that more of them are getting back into the labor force, similar to that of white workers, 1.5%. And for Hispanic workers, you actually see more of them participating in the labor force than before the pandemic, 3.2% more. So overall, we're getting better. There's still some racial inequities that are very evident. Next slide, please. And here we look at over the year employment change by supersector. And as you can see, not all supersectors have recovered the same way. So overall, all except for 2 supersectors saw positive over the year growth, especially leisure and hospitality, that gained almost 36,000 jobs over the year, 18.5% growth. Other services grew by 5.3, and construction grew by 4.6 over the year. The 2 supersectors that posted negative annual growth are financial activities, they're down 2%, and education and health services down 0.6%. Next slide, please. And then next we're looking at job loss and recovery. So the blue bar shows the percentage of jobs lost during the first 2 months of the pandemic, and the green bars shows the loss between February 2020, right before the pandemic, and now. So the gap between the 2 bars is the degree of recovery. And as you can see, the sectors that were hit the hardest by the pandemic have experienced the greatest recovery. And overall, as a state, we have regained 71% of the jobs that we lost due to the pandemic. Next slide, please. And we want to touch slightly on inflation since it's on everyone's minds right now. We use the Consumer Price Index as an indicator of inflation. So here it shows year-over-year inflation rates by month. So the inflation rate has been hovering around 0 to 2% more or less for at least a decade. At the start of the pandemic in March 2020, it was 1.54%. And as you can see, it's gotten progressively higher over the last year or so, like starting around April or May of 2021. And in February 2022, we are at 7.87% inflation. Next slide, please. So when we compare inflation with wage growth in Minnesota, the green bars is the inflation rate. The blue bar is the wage growth rate. And looking at the past decade, every year wage growth has been higher than inflation except for 2018. And then this year in 2022 February, we're starting again to see that inflation slightly is higher than wage growth. So wage grew by 7.14% over the year. Inflation grew by 7.87% over the year. So that's definitely a different trend that is emerging, and we will keep an eye on that. And that is all for the data part of the presentation. Commissioner, back to you.
Thanks, Angelina. I think with that, Alicia, we'll turn it to you to moderate our Q&A.
Thanks, Commissioner. We've got one already from Brian Bax from NPR. Given the tight labor market, are employers opting for more permanent hires, or are they having to resort to temporary workers to fill immediate gaps? And is that something you can parse in your data?
That's a great question, and we've reported on that in past jobs reports, though I don't think I've seen the numbers this month. I don't know, Angelina or Oriana, if you've seen that conversion. That had been a trend line, though, I think recently.
Well, hours worked were flat this month, so that that trend seems to have flattened out of additional, at least at this very moment, of additional hours per worker worked. In terms of temporary versus more permanent, I'm just looking up what the trend has been for temp help. Why don't I put that in the chat?
Thanks, sorry. Theo with Fox 9, over to you.
There we go. How about that? Mute button. Wondering at this stage of the recovery, who is coming back into the labor force at this point? Are you seeing any trends? Is it people who maybe took early retirement? Is it young parents? Is it people moving into the state? And then I suppose on that last part of it, is there anything the state can do or is doing, or are you asking lawmakers to fund to try to get more people to come to the state and take these jobs?
I can speak to some of that, and I think on the demography, I'd be interested to hear our economists chime in here as well. I will say, the longest term unemployed in our state are those who had the lowest wages. And so we are seeing more low-wage workers get back into the market. We are still running higher than average for the number of long-term unemployed we have in the state. I think we're, correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere around 30,000 compared to usually 11,000 around this time of year. So that is a trend that we want to continue to accelerate in a positive direction. But you are seeing people come back, and you're also seeing people switch jobs. So that 13,000 new workers is a good thing, but people are also shifting to jobs that are more attractive than the jobs they had before. And I think COVID really gave every worker that opportunity to evaluate their job, the conditions of their job, and in many cases look for new jobs in our economy. On your point, your other question, Theo, just about sort of attracting people to the state and the demography that's here, this is a critical thing that Minnesota has to do. And I'll say that this is not a state that is traditionally invested in marketing for talent attraction. Many of you know I came from the private sector before coming into this agency. And of course, at Google, we had billion-dollar marketing budgets, and I had low expectations coming into government that we'd have a lot of money for marketing. But when I found out that our marketing budget at Deed was zero, my jaw hit the floor, because our job as a department is to market our state to businesses and talent around the world. And we've not traditionally funded a marketing effort for talent in our state. And so one of the major components of our budget this legislative session for Deed that's new is to have some marketing dollars. We launched a new website last fall at joinusmn.com. It's the front door to our state for businesses and people who are looking to move. That they can understand why Minnesota, why would you come here? What's so great about our state? Let me tell you, there's 1,001 reasons, and it's a great website. Check it out. But we don't have marketing dollars to promote it. And I'll say, sitting here in North Dakota today, where there are bordering states who spend millions of dollars on marketing trying to pull our talent into their state, and looking at some of the latest demographic numbers on outmigration, this is an area where Minnesota has to be more assertive at a time where we have the tightest labor market we have ever had. So we're really hopeful the legislature will agree and give some marketing dollars for us to promote Minnesota at a time when I think that's really needed. So I don't know, Angelina or Oriana, if you want to comment more broadly on kind of who's coming back to work from a demographic standpoint, but it's a great question.
Well, I guess I'll just say overall that it seems, and the labor force participation rate is ticking up finally, and that's really great news. And it seems to be kind of across the board. I mean, we're seeing positive trends in our all of the three racial groups that we track, as well as for both women and men. So it seems to be that, we're seeing positive trends across the board.
All right, thanks, Commissioner. Thanks, Oriana. We'll go over to Kavita Kumar with Star Tribune. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I guess that as the unemployment rate is now down to 2.7%, I mean, I guess is it fair to say that that's a sign that the worker shortage is getting worse? Or what can you say about that?
Well, I think when you juxtapose that with the available labor market in our state, it does create a challenge. And we mentioned a moment ago that there's 2.7 workers looking for every one job that's available right now, and about 1.7 as a state. So it is getting to be a tighter labor market. We continue to be convinced by the data and by anecdote that there are a lot of workers hiding in plain sight that businesses can and should be recruiting into their firms. And we as a department are focused very heavily on that. How can we help businesses reach into communities where they may not speak the language or they may not have cultural ties? How can we help businesses take advantage of workers with disabilities who are a tremendous asset to our economy? And how can we start really focusing on young people and that high school aged person in Minnesota who can get on a career track early to help fulfill some of those workforce needs. So there is, I think, a lot to be done here, and a lot to be done on reskilling. One of the major components of the governor's budget is on helping people reskill into jobs that have a much longer trajectory into the future. We have about $13 million in our budget for a reskilling program that would focus on helping people take short-term tech training to shift to a job that's more tech-centric, and not just in the technology field, but really in any field where technology is central to growth, so that they can be in jobs that have a lot more stability and a longer lead time. This is critical to our economy and to our growth, as is helping young people get jobs in the technology field. Again, these jobs, they're rising at about twice the rate of other jobs in our economy. They pay about twice as much, and our pipeline there is thin. Minnesota actually ranks last in the country when it comes to high school students who take and pass the AP computer science examination. So we need to really lean forward on multiple levels here in the workforce front.
Thanks, Commissioner. I'm going to take us back to a different topic here. So in advance, I got a question from Mary LaHammer, TPT Almanac Program. She sent a screenshot. The Montana governor had sent a letter to the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce and Minnesota small business owners, sort of trying to invite them to Montana because of unemployment insurance, taxes, and was just looking for any of your thoughts on that.
Well, we saw that, of course, and governors from time to time will run campaigns or sometimes gimmicks on that front, and we appreciate the friendly competition. I think it's a good thing. It's a healthy thing. I think the governor's note on that had related to our inability to get unemployment insurance taxes taken care of through the surplus, and I would just echo that needs to happen in our state. We need to put $2.73 billion into the unemployment insurance trust fund to prevent those tax increases. The idea that we would raise taxes on small businesses when we have a $10 billion surplus in St. Paul is, I think, not sound economic policy. So we really would urge the legislature to move quickly and pass that package. We're still in negotiations with them. Obviously, that sticking point around frontline workers is, I think, the key to unlocking it. That's also in the governor's budget, something we care deeply about, and also, frankly, would be great for our economy. Putting money into the hands of workers to spend at businesses around the state only helps continue to lift our economy up. So this is an issue we really have to move on, and there's no reason we should wait until the end of the session. At that point, it'll be a lot harder to unwind. It could take months for us to figure out how to get money back to folks. It's not a simple solution for us. So we would concur that Minnesota should do what the Montana governor said that we should do, and that's been the governor's strategy from the very beginning, and something that we feel really strongly about taking care of.
Thanks, Commissioner. We have a great number of press on the line today. Are there any other questions that we can answer? I saw another one. Ethan, yeah, over to you. Business Director. Thank you.
Hi, yeah. We talked about inflation rates sort of outpacing wage growth. And I'm just curious, even anecdotally, are we hearing from employers that they're offering higher wages or anything else to attract workers or get them back in open positions?
Absolutely. I think the wage growth you're seeing is really across the board, and the data that our economist shared a moment ago shows kind of which industries are seeing the most. But I'd say we're hearing both about wage growth, but we're hearing also about employers trying new things: flexible work hours, flexible schedules, childcare subsidies, paying for your parking when you're coming into the office. I've even heard of employers giving pet insurance as a new benefit. People are getting creative, and those that are doing new things are seeing new results. It's really important. And we also know in talking to businesses that inflation and some of the supply chain challenges that businesses are facing are things they can't always just pass on in price increases to their consumer. And so businesses are trying to figure out which parts of those challenges they're going to eat, which parts they're going to pass on to their consumer, how much the market can bear. So, we're glad the Fed has already begun moving on interest rate hikes, and they're doing that, step by step to see how the market responds. But it's an important move, I think, at a time when normalizing this economy and recognizing that inflation has just continued to skyrocket, and you look at the situation in the Ukraine and the challenges it presents to the global economy as well. I think it's a smart moment for us to get some solid monetary policy into this equation as well.
Great. I think we have time for perhaps one more question, if there are any outstanding items that you'd like to ask about today. All right. Well, with that, Commissioner, back to you for a final wrap then.
Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate your time and attention today. We're optimistic about where the economy is headed. We're laser focused on this workforce shortage. It is the issue of our moment, and working together with businesses and workers, we think we're going to continue to make some progress. We certainly hope to see that labor force rate continue to rise month over month. We've got a ways to go to get it back to where it was before the pandemic. So thanks everyone. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.